but they were the keepers of technology. And of course this technology even has to do with agriculture and the rearing of seeds and all of that as well, don't forget. Not to mention the building of megalithic sites, the positioning of those sites on the earth, which involves geomancy and geometry, and the simple physical construction of things like pyramids and ziggurats and so on and so forth. So this Sumeria was, I believe, colonized originally by Westerners who had been displaced from the northwestern hemisphere. It's not to say that those lands weren't inhabited by indigenous people, they probably were. But what has happened in history, and this is very much true when you study what I'm talking about from the Indian Vedic side, the Western historians have always deliberately but maliciously presented the coming of these Western groups as invasions. And even in despite the evidence, as a matter of fact, they weren't invasions, they were migrations, and these Westerners were welcomed as basically gods, as semi-divine beings. And therefore they became the elders within a lot of these organizations. This has happened in Egypt as well, in which many of the elite pharaonic groups and even the high priests had Western Caucasian ancestry, which has now come out even more in the last couple of months. They've found out that Tutankhamun's own DNA is from the West. He had Western ancestry. So it's not that these people were the mass of the people. We're not saying that indigenous people didn't exist in these lands. They did. But the elders that I'm talking about, the high Arya, especially in Sumeria, Babylon, these would have been the Chaldeans, these would have been the high Egyptian adepts, you see, and we can definitely date certain aspects of civilization from these places, but that's only in a official context. That's in a historical context. When you start looking in a pre-historical context, that's when things get really, really interesting, because then you're dealing with groups like the Hurrians and the Amorites and a lot of other very, very fascinating groups that the history books have downplayed or try to tell you were not important.
You know, we got about 6 minutes left in this broadcast. We're going to have to get you back on in a couple weeks, if possible, because I got so much stuff I want to go through with you. Real quick, in the last 6 minutes, can you kind of break down a little bit about Atlantis to us?
Well, Atlantis Atlantis or continents of that type are mentioned throughout the world, you know, in various legends. You know, even people like Immanuel Velikovsky were able to list countless groups that spoke about these lost continents. And now you even have artifacts that people like Graham Hancock and others are photographing and cataloging. And we have a lot of bizarre relics that are being discovered, anomalies, you know, from all over the world, from South America to North America, especially language. In my Atlantis book, I talk about how these various words are so similar. Words for church, words for serpent, you know, words for woman, were so similar all over the world, proving the fact that these ancient continents existed. And my interest got started in looking at the Irish accounts, because in Britain and in Ireland, in the earliest accounts, they talk about the existence of these places that then were devastated by some cataclysm. And then what we know to be history, the historical timelines, the historical chronology, basically leads on from that. But my focus then was also about, okay, these places don't exist anymore. They talk about the devastations. My work is very much based on what consequence to consciousness did those incredible upheavals and cataclysms have. This is fundamental to understanding the world that we live in today. But certainly the history goes back, 7,000, 10,000 years to the Neolithic periods or whatever. That's only the beginning of. People look at that as the beginning of history. It's not. It's the end of one whole saga of history. That's what people need to realize, is that that's not a beginning of man's history as we know it. That's the way it's been fraudulently put in front of us. But the study of the pre-Diluvian periods. Now, if it was good enough for Socrates and Plato and the Athenians, and it was good enough for our ancestors to study this, people need to look at that and discover what the history is. I don't care if you're from Armenia or Timbuktu or Ireland or Scotland. Your own ancient history, especially in America. You spoke earlier about the nonsense of this idea of Columbus. Why don't they tell you that the Vikings and the Phoenicians and the Gaels and the Celts were there? Why don't they talk about the white Mandan Indians who have blue eyes and white faces, the Mandan Indians, that their very language is similar to Gaelic more than any other language in the world? Things I've gone into in my work. It's an amazing study.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and
it can't be understood unless you buy into the fact that higher civilizations existed before recorded time.
Yeah, in Atlantis, I've heard that they have this thing called an Atlantean generator, where they use the power of the moon and the tide. It was like a displacement of water, and the buoyancy of water somehow powered their city. Do you know anything about any of this Atlantean technology? What's your research show?
No, I haven't gone into that much detail, but I would certainly say that in the ancient times, just by the knowledge that they had, as I say, geospherically, geomantically, the Earth energy itself, that just using the frequencies, the magnetic frequencies of the Earth, was an enormous part of their power. This is probably one of the ways that they lifted the stones to build the great Cyclopean ruins and temples, like we know, like the pyramid, which defies all imagination. People have backlashed me about talking about the fact that lasers may have been used to create the various shapes, anomalies that they found at the Temple of Abydos and things like that. And I never said that lasers were used. I said it was as if lasers were used, because there's no technology today that could make those. It was like a laser would have been used. Whether a laser was used is a whole separate other technical question. So again, a lot of people misrepresent your work and misrepresent what you said and take it out of context. When you find that no technology could make a sarcophagus, it could make, that you find in the king's chamber, or make one of these amazingly intricate flowers of life that they see at the Temple of Abydos, one then speculates and one then uses their imagination to say only a laser type, is given the technology we would know today, could make that. Now that seems to be extremely threatening for most people who just cannot and will not accept that we are not the most civilized and most modern and progressed civilization on Earth. And yet when you look at it, it's unbelievable.
Michael, we got about 30 seconds left. Go ahead and plug your site. Let everyone know where to find your DVDs and everything.
Oh, yeah. Updates are always put on the forum. They can get to that through michaeltsarion.com, and all the other websites that I have are also accessible through that michaeltsarion.com website. If they go to the calendar page of the forum, they'll find out, what my schedule is and other shows and events that we're also planning for the year.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. We got to get you back on here pretty soon.
I'd love to come on. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yep. You have a good day, sir. There he goes, Michael Tsarion. When we get back, we're going to have Lucas from rabbithole2.com. Stay tuned.